And a very good evening to you on a Tuesday evening on Narrative Live. It's so good to be with you tonight, and so good to be with Eric Garland, who's been a longtime friend of the show. And it's great to have you back, Eric. You had to go away for, I guess there were some unfounded allegations made against you, and we're glad to have you back. So,
I'm back.
You are. And boy, did you tear up the internet with your thread about Durham. And we'll go into that in great detail. You know, a lot of people are saying, just ignore this investigation. It's obviously a Bill Barr prosecutor. But Bill Barr does not have any prosecutors left in the Department of Justice. It's now Merrick Garland's Department of Justice. So I very much doubt that Merrick Garland is going to allow a Bill Barr prosecutor to do some politicking going around in the Joe Biden administration. So we wanted to look through the Durham investigation and see exactly what it means. But before we do that, there's a lot going on internationally. And I wanted to bring in our good friend, Michael MacKay, who's our resident sort of Ukraine expert, or has become one at least for our show. Michael is in Ottawa, and welcome, Michael. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Zach.
So we had some news today, and I think it's significant news. Firstly, there was supposedly claims that the Russians had moved back some of their military weapons and some of their troops from the immediate borders of Russia and Ukraine and Belarus. But, you know, some people are saying we don't know if that's happened. There was other news that came out of the Duma when we found out that, you know, the Duma, the equivalent of the House of Representatives in Russia, has basically said that our people in DONETSK and Luhansk, those two regions in the eastern part of Ukraine should be, in fact, given independence, or at least their independence supported, which in other words means sort of an annexation of the territories by Russia. So give us your explanation of what's going on there, if you could.
Okay, so the first point was about these announcements about withdrawal. Mm-hmm. Well, I've learned over 8 painful years to pay no attention to these announcements.
Right.
Russia will say all kinds of things, and the proof is in the pudding. Let's see. For example, we saw announcements like this about withdrawal last year. You remember last year, about 10 months ago, Russia was staging large amounts of equipment and also personnel to the border regions. And then they had a big announcement about withdrawal. In fact, they withdrew most of the troops, but none of the equipment. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, what they had succeeded was with forward staging of this equipment, which now they have moved the troops back to and even augmented. So it's an even bigger wave. So, for example, now there's substantial numbers of Russian troops in Belarus, and that was not true a year ago. And in fact, I've just been reading reports throughout the day. There are no signs of actual withdrawal. In fact, there are further signs of forward deployment. I saw some very worrying video from just a couple hours ago, dark in Ukraine now, and it was from Belgorod. This is just across the border from Kharkiv, just to the east. So we're talking a couple dozen kilometers from the border is where this city is. And it was tanks driving on the pavement, so not even moving on tank carriers. So, you know, it's going to be tearing up the pavement and this is the sort of thing you do in the final stages of attack. So
you're saying is don't believe Putin on everything, on anything.
No, of course, never. In fact, we should assume the opposite, that what he says is a lie, and say, well, why is he saying this?
Right.
So, you know, I look at that and then I also look at what to me is a very significant action, and that is the cyber attack that took place today in Ukraine.
Right.
A very large scale distributed denial of service attack against Ukrainian government websites. So, for example, the Ministry of Defense has been down all day. I've been trying to access it, and there's just been no way to get the information I usually get there. It's still down. I checked a few minutes ago. Other sites, and also some major Ukrainian banks, which hits ATM and point of sale terminals. So people can't pay for dinner at a restaurant in Kiev right now.
If you're trying to escape,
now it's
you
getting
need
a
that
little
money.
bit better.
Yeah.
Well, this is just it. The point is the economic damage to Ukraine. And this kind of breakdown of communications is exactly the sort of thing you do immediately before an attack. So I take words and I discount them, and then I look at these actions. I also know that there were attacks in Donetsk and Luhansk today, and it was the usual level of attacks that I've been tracking for the last 7.5 years. So that's not indication of an offensive, which we're waiting for, but it's indication that there is no drawback. There's the usual level of attacks there. There's the same buildup on the border regions and in Belarus, which is forward deployment for an offensive. And there's this cyber attack, which took place, a distributed denial of service attack which caused immediate harm to the Ukrainian economy today and is the disruption of communication that we would expect just before an offensive. So,
all right. So lots to look at. Also, the move by the Duma. Tell us a little bit about that. The
Duma.
The support of the Luhansk and Donetsk.
Yeah.
Try my
Duma,
best.
of course, looks like a parliament, but this is a show. We know that it's Putin's party and some fake opposition. So whatever they say is coming from the Putin regime. And to me, it's clear that it's what they've been trying all along. It has always been the plan for these eastern regions of Ukraine not to annex them as they did Crimea, but to turn them into fake republics like Abkhazia is in Georgia or Transnistria is in Moldova. These are areas that were invaded and occupied by Russia and turned into fake republics recognized only by Russia. And they have just become like, Neverland. They're just like not even places anymore. And this is what Russia wants. They have been trying to make these regions a thorn in Ukraine's side, so, something they would have to deal with. But that never worked. It was always clear that these regions are a part of Ukraine, just as Crimea is. And whether Russia calls it annexed or some fake independent republic doesn't really make much difference. It's something that they're doing for their own people. So it's part of justifying aggression against Ukraine. They don't want to admit that they're invading Ukraine, which they are doing and have been doing for 8 years. They want to say, we're protecting Russian people, and see, they set up this independent republic. But of course, none of that is true at all. It's just a cover for an occupation regime. So it is worrying that the Duma made this decision because, for one thing, it shows that Russia is explicitly rejecting the Minsk agreement. The Minsk agreement, for which Russia is a guarantor, explicitly.
Well, the Duma is, but Putin has said he still stands by it. But of course, the Duma.
Here's the thing: it's now clear that Putin has this choice of accepting it because it's the will of the people, or rejecting it because he's the greater man and a diplomat and is thinking about all this. So he can come out of this on top by making it look like it's coming from the Duma. Right.
Yeah. That's interesting. But, it's interesting as well when you look at this that, he's called what's going on in these two regions genocide. That's, it's the kind of stuff you do when you're preparing to attack because you need a reason to attack, obviously. So that's another thing that's worrying. But also when you look at this map, it's quite clear that what he's building is the other side of the Black Sea. He wants Russia to have the other side of the Black Sea. And it's not very hard to see how he's building that out. He's already got Crimea. He's going to get Donetsk and Luhansk if it goes in there. So, there's only those two little regions that he already has a bit of an incursion into. And then he's got the whole Black Sea to himself, which is something, Russia desperately wants because it loves to have ways of moving trade, especially in the winter months. So that helps them.
Well, that body of water in between those two red bits on the map, between Crimea and those eastern regions, that's the Sea of Azov, which is a part of the Black Sea. And it already is effectively a kind of Russian lake, although it should not be. It's international waters. But that's something that they have already done. There has been a de facto annexation of that by Russia. Because
there was that scandal when they kidnapped all those sailors, really, in that very, very volatile attack. So what you're saying is don't believe Putin. There is an escalation still going on. And it certainly looks like Biden has today issued a very stern warning to the Russian president saying, if you do go, we're going to meet you with a lot of resistance internationally, with a lot of sanctions and a lot of other efforts to stop you. But also that he is encouraged that he's going to try to give diplomacy another shot. So we're going to do it again, I guess, do another round of diplomacy and see where we land.
Yeah, but the only reason why diplomacy will succeed will be because of stands, for example, by President Biden. He said today that there is and there will be a strong coalition against further aggression, because it would be further aggression, not a new invasion by Russia. And that I'm very pleased to see. It actually is the only language that Putin will understand.
Right. We are all worried because a lot of the oligarchs have left town. When the oligarchs can leave town and they leave town, then they it's a country well known for it's having oligarch control over the politicians and the leaders there. The oligarchs know more than probably anybody else, and all of them have gone. They're not sticking around. So why should the local population stick around? I know Zelensky's trying to avoid panic, but it's hard to avoid the reality of what's going on around you.
Well, the local population will stay because it's their home. And the oligarchs have built safe havens for themselves around the world. shame on these countries for harboring them, but they're able to do that.
We all like the dollar, apparently. Thank you very much, Michael. I really appreciate your time tonight. We'll have you back on as this situation progresses, and it certainly will. It doesn't look like it's over yet by a long shot, but thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you, Seth.
It's Michael MacKay in Ottawa, providing us with some context and understanding of what's going on in Ukraine. And it's not over, folks. It's not over. Not even close. So lots to go there. Let's move on to the other big story of the night, which is the Durham investigation. This thing, has been confounding a lot of us as it's been around because, Bill Barr sort of, was he about the year before he left office, appoints the special prosecutor specifically to talk about the origins of the Mueller investigation, how it began. He wanted a special prosecutor to go and look into that.
The origins of the Russia investigation.
Okay, thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Why do you make that distinction, Eric?
Language.
Why the distinction?
Because there's multiple nations involved with Trump.
Right.
He certainly owed more than just Russia stuff like money.
Right.
He owed the Bank of China. It turned out he had taken a $10 million bribe from the Egyptians in 2016. Yeah. And then there's some connections to Israelis and Hungarians. Am I missing anyone? I mean,
it's like a few countries. There's a few other countries involved. Yeah. Egypt, I think, was there.
So the Russia investigation really put a framework around it that tightened all that up.
And Bill Barr, we all assumed under orders from Trump, was, out there to try and figure out the origins, to figure out why he was being targeted. And so Durham was set up as the guy to do that. Now, this is a good prosecutor. He's got a good career track record. He may have done some silly things along the way, but as a prosecutor, he's a well-known guy and respected largely.
Yeah, he's legendary. John the Bull Durham, who legendarily took out both mob influence in the New England FBI, as well as I believe Irish Republican Army. So you've got a national security and a public integrity corruption thing at one of our most storied and important institutions, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I mean, he did all that in addition to his just putting mobsters and hitmen away. He's an extremely respected figure. And I thought personally when it happened that they had, when Barr appointed him and then the right-wing propaganda machine goes into overdrive where they're like, well, that's it. Durham's going to get you. You're going to get the lefties, because that's what this is about. It's not just about applying the law to people who have broken the law, which is what the DOJ is supposed to do. And what Mr. Durham has done his whole career is
and to tell the law,
you might be in trouble.
And the tell there is that, in fact, Merrick Garland did not get rid of Durham. He could have come in the first week and said, bye-bye, Durham. We're not doing this investigation anymore. He said, no, we're keeping Durham. And in fact, every time he's testified in front of the House committee or, in fact, in front of the Senate committee, he specifically says that he's very proud of this investigation and this is the investigation to watch. And so we're not seeing distance between Merrick Garland and the Durham investigation. So because there's no distance between them, we should assume that because he's the boss, he can decide, right? That he probably is well aware of what Durham is investigating and probably is supportive of his prosecution. So there are people out there who are saying, not to believe anything that Durham is saying and that it's just a distraction. It just can't be true. This guy's too respected. Merrick Garland is not going to run a corrupt ship, just is not. And well, I don't think so. And Joe Biden is not going to let Merrick Garland run a corrupt ship either. So those are the reasons I would say we should take a look in greater detail at what Durham found.
It's a grotesque insult to the line level prosecutors, analysts working for Department of Justice, support staff. I mean, most of DOJ, are career employees of the federal government. And this is incredibly serious work for serious people. And that can be at Maine DOJ, U.S. attorneys' offices, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, U.S. Marshals, and others, who are helping prosecute these cases and helping investigate them. And because Barr came out and framed not only everything about the Trump-Russia hoax, but also framed the activities of this Durham guy as political. And remember, they were getting ready to throw a violent coup d'etat. They maybe didn't expect Durham to need to be around. Maybe they were hoping for an October surprise. And I believe the first indictment from Kevin Kleinsmith was August of 2020, but it really flew under the radar. So, if that's what they were hoping for, they didn't get it. And I tracked this all along. What are the sources of, quote, the Russia investigation? Because if you're talking about the Steele dossier and the attempts to feed it to the FBI, that is an interesting story. What was the roots of that story? That's a really rich subject. Now, if you were only going to take that up to November of that year and hope Trump would win because we all had COVID and couldn't get to the polls, or you were maybe just hoping to murder Congress on January 6th, or whatever your plan was, you weren't thinking of another year or 2 years of prosecution beyond that. So you were hoping for the propaganda value of it. And I think it was middle of 2020 or fall of 2020, John Durham sat down with John Brennan, former director of the CIA, for 8 hours. Mm-hmm. And when they emerged, Brennan's spokesman said they had a great conversation, and Durham told him he was not a subject of the investigation. So, if you're in trouble somewhere in an investigation like that, where there might be a grand jury, you're going to be a subject or a target, or you're a witness. Right? Or you're a victim. Those are your classifications. And when he said he's not a subject, that means he's not a target either. So he's either a witness or a victim. So all this, we're going to get you. We're going to get the Obama guys for hooking up this fake Russia stuff. The early tell on what side Durham was on the side of truth, and or on the side of due process more than truth, because we don't know all the facts, haven't been tried in a court of law yet. But we do know he met with John Brennan, who the right wingers were like, we're going to get you, deep state. And then they didn't.
So the two important things that I think have to be remembered here. None of this is saying that the Trump campaign did not have very deep and suspicious contacts with the Russians, and that there is a lot of suspicious activity that happened between the Russians and the Trump campaign, which we have spoken about in narrative ad nauseum since the very beginning. Clearly, there was some sort of collusion, conspiracy, call it what you will, between Russia and the Trump campaign to get elected. I mean, I think you could say that is about as factual a statement as can be out there, considering the number of people who've investigated it. And primarily the Senate's Intelligence Committee, which came out with Volume 5 and says it pretty clearly that that's the thing. So everyone is freaking out and saying, does this mean that Trump-Russia was not a real thing? No, Trump-Russia was definitely a real thing. It's possible for that to exist and for the Durham investigation to exist all at one time. It's also possible that this is not an attack on Hillary Clinton, that this is just looking at the people who might have committed some sort of conspiracy. And Hillary Clinton may have known about it, may not have known about it, probably didn't, may have been a target of it, may have not been a target of it, may have been influenced by it because of the media coverage of it, or in fact, other people within the administration, within the Clinton campaign may have been targeted as well. In fact, I will say that I wrote a story unbeknownst to me, that I didn't realize some of the stuff about the Alpha server was fake. And I believed the sources that were out there because they were out there and legitimate players were relaying them, including, various newspapers and also some people online on Twitter. So, that's how this Alpha server story came to life. Some of us fell for it. I fell for it. And I think it's quite possible that others fell for it too, including possibly people like Hillary Clinton. So people who are saying this is an accusation against Hillary Clinton, that's not true. I've not seen any accusations against Hillary Clinton as far as I can see. Have you seen it, Eric? I've not seen anything so far saying that Hillary Clinton is involved in anything.
No, I haven't seen that directly from anyone else.
Yeah. So if people are saying it, you should question them for saying it because it's just not true. So what we are saying is that there was some sort of weird business going on with the Alpha server. And do you want to overall explain the Alpha server? I know it's a really complicated thing, but can you give us like a Cole's note on what the Alpha server scandal was, and then also, how it came to life? Well, just give us what it was first, and then we'll figure out how it came to life.
You got to go a little bit further back to how Fusion GPS ended up working on opposition research against Trump. They were engaged originally by Republican hedge fund billionaire Paul Singer, who was a supporter of, I think, Jeb Bush in the beginning, then Marco Rubio. But in any event, he hired Glenn Simpson's group, who in turn hired Christopher Steele's group to go out and get some stuff on Trump. And then that got turned over to Perkins Coie, the Chicago-based law firm. And two of the attorneys there, Michael Sussman and Mark Elias, were attorneys for the Clinton campaign, the Clinton Foundation, and the Democratic National Committee. In addition to them, they're a global law firm. So they have lots of clients, but they specifically were tightly tied to Hillary, and they took over the Fusion GPS work straight from Polsinger, which is pretty interesting. Yeah.
And we talk about the Polsinger and the Fusion GPS work. We're talking about the Steele dossier, which everyone remembers is that it contained famously this P-tape allegation. That's what everyone focused about. But actually, it had a long laundry list of things where the Trump campaign or Trump was involved with Russia. And it was quite, in many ways, very accurate in some ways. I think mostly accurate, but there's some things in there that some people still question, but I think mostly accurate in my opinion. Others may differ. However, the Steele dossier became very controversial. It got landed into the campaign process by, so I don't even know who did that, but it landed up in Trump being aware of it, and it landed up that BuzzFeed published the entire thing. And suddenly it became a big factor in the election campaign. From there, that's just adding some context. That thing has been very controversial. Obviously, the Steele dossier has been a very controversial document throughout. What was the role of Perkins Coie in that? So they took it over from Paul Singer.
And they financed it. They financed they paid for Fusion GPS, who in turn paid Orbis, which is Christopher Steele's group, who then subcontracted to subsources such as a Russian national who worked at the Brookings Institution, Igor Danchenko, who has been indicted by the Durham investigation, and Chuck Dolan, who was a former Clinton administration from back in the 90s official. I believe he worked for the Department of State. And he went on to be a top executive with Ketchum PR, which counts Gazprom and the Russian Federation itself as their clients for public relations. So,
it's interesting. It's an interesting group of people. I mean, the Perkins Coie group, just to remind everyone and what Eric was saying, and to underline it again, yes, they might have done work for the Hillary campaign, and they might have done work for the DNC. Did they do DNC, or was it just the Hillary campaign? I think just the campaign.
So Mark Elias is the general counsel for the Democratic National Committee, which had its servers hacked. And Perkins Coie represented as a law firm, represented Hillary for America and the Clinton Foundation itself. So
that doesn't mean that we're operating under orders from any of these companies. We don't have any of the organizations.
Well, this is the problem. So where they got into trouble is the FBI said, so are you here as just, regular old patriotic Americans, or are you here on behalf of a client? Now, remember, Michael Sussman's a former assistant U.S. attorney focused on cybercrime, so he should know better.
Yeah.
And he said, nope, just here on our own. And he said the same thing to the CIA, and he said this to multiple people. And it turned out when Durham subpoenaed some of the documents from within the law firm, he had billed that time to the Clinton campaign.
Oh, okay.
So it wasn't just a lie, it was a documented lie, and that's the kind of thing that ends up in grand juries.
Right. And someone may have signed off on those payments, and it may have gone to Michael Sussman, but we don't know who that person was. As far as I know, maybe we do.
We don't know, but we know that there was a lot of time spent on working with James Baker, the general counsel. They were putting this dossier that was prepared by Steele and by Fusion GPS, in addition to the forensic data that they were receiving from a group that was coordinated by the chief technical officer for New Star, Rodney Jaffe, who I was working with Georgia Tech, and where it gets really concerning, and this is something that all the naysayers are conveniently dropping, is that apparently the researchers at Georgia Tech were like, we're not sure about, assessing this with high confidence that this is what we're seeing. We might be seeing this, we might be seeing something else. And some of the verbatims that are in the Durham indictments are from some of the people around Fusion GPS and Perkins Coie, where it's relayed to these researchers. This doesn't have to be like airtight. This just has to be kind of good enough for, a good story.
Pass the smell test, but not doesn't have to be the actual thing. That's basically
the FBI has different standards for national security investigations than media outlets do by necessity. It would be great if both of them had pristine, utterly, forensically perfect standards for truth, but it's not reasonable. Our newspapers would cost like $117 a copy. If you're talking about the forensics of getting data that quality and in keeping archives that vast, like the FBI does. And somebody who was an assistant U.S. attorney should know that. And so turning data, oh, no, it's good enough. Well, it might be good enough for news item, for news organizations. But when you're turning it over to the National Security Division and, you're maybe hoping that a FISA warrant gets thrown on some of the individuals you mentioned in your raw human intelligence dossier of unknown provenance, when you hand something to the Federal Bureau of Investigations, they may investigate that.
Yep. That's their job is to investigate it, actually. So if they think there's a crime, they would have gone and investigated. And now they would have discovered that maybe this document with all its allegations had some odd statements in it, but also some odd sourcing. And they would begin to ask questions, which would be necessary. But just to remind everyone here of where we are so far, we've got the Steele dossier has this chain of custody. It begins with Singer, multi-billionaire guy. He drops the report, but it gets picked up by Perkins Coie, which is a law firm that works for the Clinton Foundation, also the DNC and the Hillary campaign. And that they then proceed to continue the Steele dossier, which has always been put together by the Fusion GPS people and Christopher Steele of Orbis. That's where we are right now, right? That's sort of where we are. We got all the way to Perkins Coie.
Yeah, I think there's the technical data that's concerning about where it came from, and feeding that story to the media and not having it be quite accurate, because the FBI has looked into it and it was crap. Mm-hmm. That's their conclusion, not mine. I don't have the skills to assess that, but somebody did. Yeah. But what's really troubling there is over on the left side of that graph I put together is Kevin Klein Smith.
Before we go there, and you're probably going there anyhow, who are these three people? Let's just tell everyone before we move any further so they know who these three people are. You're about to mention Kevin Klein Smith, former FBI attorney. Who's he?
He was assistant general counsel to the FBI. And he was assigned primary legal responsibility for Crossfire Hurricane, which was, probably the most important, FBI investigation in recent memory. Mm-hmm. That was, about an incredibly worrisome situation where a presidential campaign might be so deeply compromised by a foreign power that its employees might be considered to be acting on tasking given from that foreign government. That's what it takes to get a FISA on you. You're not just in trouble. To get a FISA warrant, you have to be acting on behalf of a hostile foreign government,
right?
Not just you're really partial to, Chinese distributors of industrial equipment that you sell. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a whole lot of people who might be in on that. Or you sell French perfume, and you're just a Francophile, and you also work in politics. No, that wouldn't qualify either.
Right.
You got to be to get a FISA on you, which is we take the awesome power that Ed Snowden tried to tell us that was focused on everyone if they wanted from the intelligence community. But if you want to turn that on Americans for real, you need this incredibly hard to get FISA warrant where these, applications are hundreds of pages, and you have to prove to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that this person that we're putting this on, has probable cause to be acting as the agent of a hostile foreign power against the U.S. national security. We need to track this guy with everything we got now.
Right.
And they did that on a guy named Carter Page.
Yes, a well-known name to all of us who've investigated the story a lot in the last few years. Before we go further to Carter, let's talk a little bit about who Igor Danchenko is.
Danchenko is a younger guy. He was working at the Brookings Institute doing Eurasia analysis, Russian national, originally, I believe, a Russian citizen. Worked under Fiona Hill, I believe, who we remember from Impeachment 1 there with the Ukraine situation there. And I believe he worked, if I've read the documents carefully, Danchenko worked for Chris Steele as a subcontractor, which was, seemed reasonable. Sounds like a knowledgeable guy. But what happened was he ended up hooking up with this Chuck Dolan for the dossier project here. And Dolan is apparently quite close with a number of oligarchs and, Putin regime officials. I believe Dmitry Peskov. I mean, he's
the spokesman for Putin, just that close to Putin.
Yeah, he was real close to those guys. It was on a first name basis with those cats.
And it's amazing because he's the best paid spokesperson in the world. He has the most luxurious lifestyle you can imagine. He's got like mansions, he's got fast cars, you name it. This guy, Peskov, has quite a lifestyle considering he's a bureaucrat, considering he's just a public servant in the Federation of Russia. So
we haven't gotten Jem Psaki, a mansion on
No, and she deserves one. I would give her a mention. She's so good. She's so damn good at that job. So no, she hasn't got that. So, and Michael Sussman, we've spoken about. We've spoken about Michael Sussman as being the lawyer. Is he a lawyer? Was that correct?
Long career in DOJ, and then went into the private sector, which is not at all unusual. So, and continue to have relationship with high-ranking officials. So.
You mentioned as well Rodney Jaffe, who's a guy who works for this company called New Star, and we'll get to that a little later on because it's important to get there. So now let's go to your very, very detailed and interesting thread. And I don't know if we need to go through all of these, but I have every single one of those things that you sent me available. And you tell me as we go through them what you want to focus on. Here we go. Can you read that? On July 31, 2016, the FBI opened a Foreign Agent Registration Act investigation known as Crossfire Hurricane. And then it goes on to say it included a person referred to herein as individual number 1, which we know as Carter Page.
Now, note that's an 18 U.S. Code Chapter 951 case. That is more than just your average FARA filing, because let's say you're a PR firm and you are taking orders directly from Belgium and they come upon you and you are just pushing Belgian waffles at the direction of the Belgian government and you have not registered. That's a 42 U.S. Code, bureaucratic violation, and they're going to give you a lot of chances at bat to, come on, don't you want to register and tell us about your waffle, people? But 18 U.S. Code 951, that's felony, and they hit like Russian and Cuban spies on U.S. soil with that. So, the fact that they had a 951 investigation into a presidential campaign is fire. That's a big deal. And that one of the cases, of course, I believe Crossfire Razor was Flynn. I, forget the other code words off the top of my head, but Carter Page was in there, and he's referred to as individual 1. And in paragraph 3 there, he was one of the individuals at the FBI, the defendant, this is, I believe, Klein Smith, was one of the individuals at the FBI who communicated with another specific United States government agency, the OGA, to raise questions or concerns for the Crossfire Hurricane team. The OGA, the other government agency, is the Central Intelligence Agency there.
Right. Why would this guy who's investigating this, why would he talk to the CIA?
If you had somebody that was known to be traveling outside of the country and mixing with certain individuals and then coming back to the United States and they are U.S. citizens, you do a deconfliction process where you make sure that guy isn't on anyone else's payroll around here, to make sure hey, he's not with you, is he? He's not, is he a bad guy that we have to worry about? Or is he on someone's team? And they might not get into exactly who, because, this is need to know basis, but there are liaisons between the agencies and they'll go, no, he's with us. And they'll go, okay, cool. You don't need FISA on him, then we'll just deal with you as to, we might need to communicate that way.
Right. You don't want to spy on our own team.
And
basically,
think of how, if it turns out, and against his civil rights, which is something Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes all whined about, and we all thought he was full of crap. So anyways, they were full of crap. So let's go on.
And then we go into number 4 here. So you want to pick it up here where it says, in addition, as part of responsibilities, the defendant provided support.
Yeah, he provides support for the FBI special agents and supervisory special agents in the NATSEC div for FISA applications. And so they did 4 applications for Carter Page there.
Wow.
And each of them alleged that there was probable cause that he was a knowing agent of a foreign power, specifically Russia. So they laid in super heavy allegations in those FISA documents, which are classified and dense, and they make sure that everything's right before they get them, or they're supposed to.
The Steele dossier, the Carter Page made allegations in the Steele dossier. Is that what you're saying? And that this is the reason that they're investigating.
Well, a lot of that FISA warrants are, I think they might have released one or more that are still redacted for national security reasons. But I believe we know that the Steele dossier was included as part of the big, thick stack that they put in front of the FISC. So, it may not have been the only reason, but it was in there as a reason. And the fact that it is not of particularly good quality forensic information is problematic. And, the Office of the Inspector General of DOJ has been over these and said, no, there were material errors in these. Right. So it's sort of scandalous.
Because, in fact, potentially there might be another government agency that Carter Page worked for.
That's right. That could be true.
Yeah,
well, and here's where all the people who have said, oh, there's nothing to look at here, they just don't know the U.S. government and they don't know what they're talking about, because this is not a minor error.
Yeah, so you don't want to spy on your own people who are doing, difficult work out there. You don't want to be doing that. It's dangerous.
And when the CIA tells the FBI something, that needs to be heard about, the identity of an individual to say, no, he's with us, back off. Yeah. The FISA court has to hear about that, has to hear the truth, but they didn't hear the truth.
Right.
So we're only at 18 U.S. Code 1001 charges here. So, the grand jury still needs to hear what the mens rea, what the mindset was. Why did these guys lie? And that's what still remains to be understood and seems pretty important. So in Durham's charging documents here, paragraph 5 on August 17th, 2016, prior to the approval of FISA 1, the CIA provided members of the Crossfire Hurricane team the August 17th memorandum indicating Carter Page had been approved as an operational contact for them from 2008 to 2013. So Carter Page had been informing to the CIA about Russian espionage activities in the United States and elsewhere for a minimum of 5 years. And so they were aware of his contacts with Russian intelligence officers. And the first 3 FISA applications did not include that information. And that is something that the FISC had to know about. And Klein Smith apparently lied about it. And that is not a nothing burger, kids.
Yeah. So Klein Smith, in fact, changed some emails, right? Or did he change the actual documents themselves? But what did he do that was fraudulent?
He lopped off the initial emails between him and the CIA and then passed those on and it's like, oh, no, we're cool. There's nothing,
Wow.
And
that seems like a very serious thing. It does seem like a very serious thing. You're talking about the CIA. There's a lot of people involved in intelligence work. The last thing you want is to compromise anybody there. And here he is compromising somebody there. Never mind, it's for an election campaign. That's a whole other level of craziness.
And let's remember that this information from Perkins Coie, from Fusion GPS, they're also basically selling this like a product to the media at the exact same time. They weren't letting the FBI work it out. Well, we just wanted to tell you guys. No, at the same time, they were selling the same stuff without the benefit of the FBI's perspicacity and breadth of vision there.
Yeah, it seems serious. Seems serious to me. I don't work in the government, but it seems like you could be compromising people, and that's you can't do that. You just can't do it. And one agency should know what the other agency is doing, so they're not compromising it. And certainly, if you're changing documents, that's not a good look. It just isn't a good look.
Nah, that'll get you federal charges.
It's apparently so. So that's what's happened here. And so now this is maybe a digraph source. The
digraph is the 2 letters. He may be a CI source. So he may be a confidential informant. Okay. This is a fact we would need to disclose in our next FISA renewal. To that end, can we get 2 items from you? Source check. Is Carter Page a source in any capacity? 2, what is a CI source or whatever type of source he is? Incidentally, the FBI refers to these kinds of people as CHSs, confidential human sources, and the CIA refers to these things as CIs, confidential informants. So so now we're heavy into government national security pig Latin. So. Right.
But the truth is that they're saying here that Page works for the CIA. And, why did they not know about it? It just seems that they were missing information that was very important to them.
So it says in paragraph 8 here, the liaison also wrote that CIA uses the digraph to show that the encrypted individual is a U.S. person. We encrypt the U.S. persons when they provide reporting to us. My recollection is that Carter Page was or is a confidential informant, but the documents will explain the details if you need a formal definition for the FISA, because they might have different code words or, different definitions that are internal to that agency. If you really need more than that, let us know and we'll work up some language and get it cleared for use because, even the internal bureaucracy, there's what's known as agency controlled information that's only the agency even doesn't let it out to the FBI. They might not even let it out to the FISA court if they don't have to. It's, need to know. It's spook stuff. So they're like, but if you need something more specific, let us know and we'll get it cleared. We can get permission if you absolutely need it. Assuming that, of course, this guy at the FBI is going to be an honest broker because who would be in such a job and do anything else but be totally honest?
And Carter Page did spend a lot of time in Russia. He was involved in being around a lot of energy officials in Russia, if I remember correctly. He had a lot of information, but he was also putting himself into if he was, in fact, a CIA confidential informant, into a risk zone. And by lying about it to the court, that puts him at risk and the whole operation at risk. So, this is not light stuff. And this looks very factual to me. I mean, people are out they're saying there's no facts here. It looks pretty factual. I mean, these are not things that you could really lie about. They're documents, papers, being in front of judges.
People are throwing, this very reflexive blanket, Bill Barr, Durham, political, something. It's like, do you know how an operational contact works for the CIA? No? And yet you have this opinion. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, they must have just cooked up all these facts. Okay, how? So you're accusing how many DOJ employees of a forgery? Because that's what you're doing. Yep. You're accusing them of federal crimes. I'm pretty serious about that kind of thing before I accuse a huge group of DOJ employees of committing federal felonies. But that's
you just don't do that kind of thing. So looking at some of the chats, people have been sharing some of their thoughts about all of this all the way from the beginning of the show, and just want to make sure we hear what they're saying. For one thing here, there is a question from someone on the chat who said, is it true that Steele had an affair with Ivanka Trump? And they're saying, yeah, Andrea, wow, I hadn't heard that. Just Googled Guardian 2019. Steele had a personal relationship with Ivanka Trump, DOJ report reveals. In fact, I believe that's true too. I think that's what I read, and I think that's been verified, that they had a little bit of a relationship, him and Christopher Steele and Ivanka Trump.
I don't care what anybody does with their pee-pee parts these days.
Me neither. Rod Rosenstein defends NSO versus WhatsApp. DOJ used NSO versus the U.S. citizens. I don't think they used it against U.S. citizens. I don't think there's any evidence of that. I do think that Rod Rosenstein did defend the NSO versus WhatsApp, and I do think that maybe they even brought copies to investigate it. But I don't think they used it against any citizens, David.
Yeah, no. Rosenstein joined King and Spalding and represented NSO after he left government. However, it was right around that time when he left when I believe the FBI bought a copy of Pegasus for NSO. So not far off.
Yeah, I mean, they needed to see how it worked, apparently. Mike says, if Hillary would have dropped it in the middle of one of those debates, that would have put Trump on defense in the last days of the campaign. Dropped what? I'm not really sure what they're referring to here.
Some of this, right. Alpha Bank stuff, maybe. But she came out and called him a puppet of Vladimir Putin. I'm no puppet. You're the puppet. You're the puppet.
Right.
So she kind of did throw it at, she threw that stuff at him, but...
It wasn't really working with all these shenanigans. And then it's someone saying here, Heavenly Dreamer saying, I think David Korn tried to push the Steele dossier before he went to BuzzFeed. I think it's true too. I've heard that, but I don't know very many more details about it.
I mean, I had heard about the dossier in 2016, well before, it was in public circulation. A lot, certain people in certain circles had heard that there was a thing floating around amongst the media. And I think Michael Iskoff, who was at Yahoo News, and I put some of these brand names up on my little chart, my Glenn Beck chart, with all the different, with the string and the thumbtacks. David Korn at Mother Jones and Michael Iskoff at Yahoo News, and a couple others. Eric Lichtblau actually was going to BGR Group, the Russia FARA agents, to work with them on some of this. So the New York Times passed ultimately on it, but not before saying on October 31st that, investigating Trump, FBI finds no links to Russia, which was not quite true either, it turns out.
No, it was not quite true. So we've covered off some of this stuff on the left-hand side. You just mentioned a lot of the U.S. media outlets. You've mentioned Carter Page. We've gone through all of that and working for potentially the CIA as a confidential informant. Kevin Klein Smith, we've spoken about. The relationship with James Baker and the FBI, you've mentioned a little bit, but maybe I haven't heard enough about him. What happened there?
Not that much is known, though. There is another filing in the Durham investigation that pertains to this, I believe, devices that they now have in custody that they just let the court know that they'd had one phone in custody from James Baker, and I think they found another two, and they had to let him know that. And I was like, oh. But that's, that's in the innuendo. There's nothing conclusive about that. So, I put the little red boxes, there for a reason. These are the people that have been indicted, and they're indicted on a very limited basis. Now, late yesterday, Sussman also put up a response to the conflict of interest motion that was made by Durham. And, he's saying, well, it's like you're accusing us of some larger conspiracy. I'm like, well, there's a lot going on here, guys.
If it looks like a conspiracy and walks like a conspiracy, it could be a conspiracy.
It's 18 U.S. Code, Chapter 371.
All right. So let's get to, my personal favorite here, the Alpha server scandal controversy. I mean, this was the big key to everyone that, there was something wild going on between Trump and the Russians. And yet there's been no conclusive evidence, one would say, that is in fact what happened. There is some evidence, some scant evidence, that some of the IPs appear to be communicating with each other in an unusual pattern. However, where everything falls apart is that the IPs themselves may have been spoofed or not actually originating from where they should have. So what they said they were coming from. So someone had gone in and spoofed these IPs and said, hey, look, we've got all these things communicating with each other, but maybe they weren't.
Yeah, that's something that could possibly have been spoofed. And that's the kind of thing that, like, FBI cyber might be able to put more, elbow grease into, or on the foreign side, the National Security Agency could liaise with their colleagues over at FBI and CIA. The CIA has cyber, stuff. It's like, to really make sure you have these giant, hugely funded organizations called intelligence agencies, and they can do a lot more than a group of university researchers. Though I don't want, I'm not here to cast aspersions at open source intelligence. That's what I work out of, and look at what happened with the January 6th, where you've got the sedition hunters who are going through photos and, just finding out who people are and tracking down their social media. And, that was an absolutely essential part of, how fast January 6th prosecutions have moved. That and thousands upon thousands of valuable tips for the FBI from the general public. You don't want to, tell everybody that, this can only come from James Bond types. That's not true.
That's not true at all. But, if a group of people get together and conspire or come up with some story that is, not true, and especially if they go against any presidential campaign, I don't care who it is, if any of the people running for the presidency of the United States are being targeted by a group of people with fake information about some plots that they might be involved in, but they're not involved in at all, that's really significant. I mean, I have very little time for the Trump presidency, and I've certainly been vocally critical of it in many, many ways. I don't think they even won the 2016 election, if you want to be honest, but I am completely, I'm opposed to people accepting lies as truth in order to justify their condemnation of Donald Trump. It looks like it was a made-up story. It doesn't look like the Alpha Bank server was really there and operating the way it was said. And it is also very concerning that, and Mueller basically said so when he was testifying in front of the committee. So, So, it's a bit of a non-story, except it was really a story because a group of people may have actually targeted a candidate for the president of the United States with a fake thing. And that fake thing is the Alpha server.
And, for the people that want to cast aspersions on this, I'm going to take it the exact same way that the prosecutors do in this matter. What are the facts before us? Who lied? And, and if this is such an airtight story, and it was funny, I saw all the, a variety of not all that organic looking Twitter accounts, saying, but nobody's proved the Alpha Bank story wrong. It's like, that's not true. The FBI has been very clear on this, that they looked into it and it has no validity. But go at this story from the vantage point of facts. If this was such an airtight story, then why are people lying about it? Why are you lying about whether you're charging the Clinton campaign for it? Why are you lying about Carter Page? Oh, I talked to the CIA and they don't know him, but they did. And there's all sorts of forensic evidence proving that this Klein Smith guy, who pleaded to a criminal information good and early, and I believe got probation, which is generally the sign that somebody's very cooperative and may have indicated the other members of a conspiracy. That's what'll get you out of that kind of hot water. Because when you're talking about, sabotaging a national security investigation, getting a probation, just don't get caught drunk driving and, check in, once every few weeks or whatever. You have to usually provide some significant assistance to the government in order to have prosecutors be willing to tell the court that you're okay with that being that person's penalty. So that suggests that Mr. Klein Smith has been very helpful to the U.S. government. And by helpful, that usually means putting other people away. So it seems unlikely that this is going to be constrained to 3 individuals.
Right. There's another name here which struck me, and I'm sure struck you when you came across it, and that is New Star. I mean, that is as a corporation. That is a big company. And
They're
you
a
mentioned
defense
earlier,
contractor.
yeah, Rodney Jaffe is a guy who works for them and is involved in some of this. How is he involved in it?
Apparently, he ran the research team, and he was chief technical officer for the company. And shout out to Justin Coleman, my research colleague, who found that Neustar there was partnered with Russia's Vimpelcom to provide them with, which is a major telecom provider. And this was a 2007 press release, I believe, that they
provided messaging services, I think, for Vimpelcom.
Messaging services. So there's some Russia contacts there.
Do some work with the Russians, is just what I say. And this is an interesting name that comes up because John Vane weirdly came up in my show. It was just a week ago, I think. Maybe it was a little longer, where we spoke about, LB and some other people involved in some things. And this guy, John Vane, is the person that LB introduced me to as I was being sent on what I believe is a catch and kill interview with Ari Ben Menashe. John Vane is the guy I had to speak to, to help coordinate all of this. And then he was going to offer to assist us in our investigation with a major broadcaster if we attached ourselves to it. And, I had left that story behind last week. But on the other hand, here's John Vane, and he sold his company to Neustar. His company called MarketWatch to Neustar for $450 million. So that's an interesting connection between Mr. Vane and the story, this bigger story. But also, the person who I found out about the Alpha Bank server from was a person by the name of Louise Mensch. We all know Louise Mensch. I hope we don't know her as well as I know her, and maybe as well as Eric knows her, because she's not been very nice to me over the years. She certainly accused me of very many libelous, wrong, incorrect things. But she's the person that I discovered about the Alpha server from. And in fact, I think a lot of people found out about the Alpha server through her reporting, which is interesting. Here she is in this tweet. I think Muller, she wrote, Alison Gill is referring to maybe you, or maybe me in this tweet here. Don't listen to people who think Durham is onto something. He's not. Block and move on. Who knows who she's referring to, but certainly I believe he's onto something. You believe he's onto something. Maybe
the federal judges in the District of D.C.? Is that because are those guys that off base? My God, that judge should really get onto these two internet figures.
Maybe Eric Garland as well. Eric Garland, because he thinks he's onto something. Just as hazard a guess there.
I mean, it's not like they were going to put him on the Supreme Court or anything. I mean, he's just a coffee boy over there.
Now, Muller, she wrote, Alison Gill may have not been the person who she may not have named anybody, but guess who did? Louise Mensch mentioned you, Eric Garland, for falsely accusing Hillary Clinton yesterday, which you did not do. In fact, falsely accuse Hillary Clinton of anything. Louise.
Louise isn't that accurate. I don't know if you looked that up. You can Wikipedia it. She's not very accurate. Yeah.
And if you look at the origins of the whole Alpha Bank story, you'll find out that a lot of it is related to her publication and her publicizing that whole story. And what makes this next little bit of information such a clincher, and I'm sharing it because of the fact that it's now publicly important that I share it, is that I happen to know that Louise Mensch had direct ties with John Vane. And I know that because LB told me that. I don't know if you do. I don't know if Louise Mensch, do you know John Vane? Why don't you tell us? I'm sure you'll tell us right after this. You'll have lots to say on your Twitter feed, and I'm sure people would love to hear from you about whether you know John Vane, because I would like to know if you know John Vane and in what capacity do you know John Vane. And then while I'm at it, I should also mention that Alison Gill and LB, and I think you, were involved in a fundraising scheme coordinated by John Vane, related to to the Biden campaign.
That's where I recognize that name.
That's where you recognize the name, yeah. So that's a lot of people involved in both John Vane's life and in the story of the Alpha server life. And I'll leave it there. I mean, I think it's just all interesting. I remain fascinated every day by every development that I'm learning here, on a micro level and on a macro level. But certainly if you throw up a chart that looks like this, boy. Did I mention that John Vane also knew Steve Bannon? I didn't mention that. John Vane is very close to Steve Bannon because he was, in fact, there when Ovitz got the deal from Steve Bannon about the sale of the artist management company.
Artist management, yeah.
So there you go. Yeah. So and I think LB also got some screen scripts or something, I don't know, from Bannon to proof as well. So she might have some knowledge there too. I think maybe Louise knows Bannon. I don't know, maybe. Why don't you tell us all, guys? We're really interested. And, this continues. I've been trying to leave the story behind. I promised I would, except that we keep getting these personal attacks. But more than that, now I think it's public knowledge and publicly important that people find out about these things, because they're very damning links, it looks like to me, and people should be aware of them. And at least, as they read these tweets and read this commentary by people who claim to be public figures and who claim to be on the side of justice, you should be aware of where their connections might lie. And that is all I'll say there. I wouldn't say anything, there's nothing more here than that there's some interesting connections, just some really interesting connections.
Very interesting.
So that's the show for tonight on Narrative. My thanks to you, Eric Garland. It's so good to have you back here, by the way. You are so good at this stuff. I knew nothing about this Durham thing until yesterday morning, and you're already so good. Everyone should go check it out. Everyone should subscribe to your feed anyhow, because it is lightning and informative and brilliant. And there's 300,000 people who go there on a regular basis, which is one of the biggest accounts I know. And it's certainly full of really important information. If you want to know what's going on before anybody else, it's the place to go. So that's at Eric Garland on Twitter, and everyone should follow that account. Any last thoughts from you?
It's going to be an interesting week, guys. So
yes,
let's just all be good to each other. Let's be kind, considerate, and professional to one another in public, and see you out there on the internet webs.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. It's also troubling for all of us. And I'm trying to keep it as sane as possible and to make it as non-personal as possible. And I think that's the most important thing for all of us going forward as we look into this. Hopefully this will be the last conversation we have, but I suspect it is not going to be the last conversation we have on this topic. We'll just see how it develops in the next few weeks. I also want to thank Michael MacKay for being here earlier on and sharing his information on what's going on in Ukraine. We'll certainly follow that story going forward. And to you at home, thank you for being here on Narrative, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.